Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, pretty much wherever you all are joining us from. Welcome to our final episode of Flood News at Noon. We are excited to have you today as we have some special announcements at the end of the presentation today. We're going to talk about some future projects we have going on. We also have our giveaways that we're actually giving out today. As we end season 2, we have a great topic. We have a great speaker with us today. It's going to talk about some some storm preparation, what to do before and after some storms, and introduce some stuff about adjuster well-being as well, and cover some of that. So our topic today, our title today is "It Wasn't Raining When Noah Built the Ark," and so it kind of goes into being prepared. And that's what we've been doing with these Flood News at Noon series, is preparing for the storm season, preparing for that next flood. And so just like it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark, we need to prepare now for that next flood claim. And that's what we're doing with these Flood News at Noon series. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie. And Julie, now you can do your little intro. So sorry for jumping in like that.
No, it's my fault. I kind of got ahead of things. All right, our guest speaker today is Dr. Sharon Croisant, who's a professor at UTMB School of Medicine's Department of Preventative Medicine and Population Health. She directs the Community Engagement Core for the Gulf Coast Center for Precision Environmental Health, as well as the Baylor Rice University Superfund Research Center, both of which were funded in recent years by the NIEHS. She has established longstanding collaborative relationships with community stakeholders with a vested interest in using research findings to direct community-based intervention and outreach activities. Her team has developed a consortium of university and community partners focused on understanding and improving community health, particularly in man-made or natural disaster situations necessitating environmental health risks and community resiliency assessments. To this end, she has been involved in research and outreach related to hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Ike, as well as exploration of the health impacts of seafood contamination due to the Deepwater Horizon explosion and subsequent unprecedented oil spill. These efforts led directly to ongoing disaster response research initiatives in developing the capabilities to rapidly take the field in the event of a natural or man-made disaster. Please welcome Dr. Sharon Croisant.
Great. You ready for me to share my slides?
Yes, ma'am. Perfect.
Okay, so now you're seeing presenter mode?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've listed here all the centers I'm associated with, not because I want you to be particularly impressed with all of these centers, but it's really about the dates. If you think about what was going on back in 2005, we had Katrina and Rita, and that was not too long after we were actually funded in 1999. We were the only NIEHS funded center on the Gulf Coast. So we responded at that time and did some needs assessments. In 2008, of course, we had Hurricane Ike here in Galveston, and we got up to 11 feet of water with that. And then we've had Hurricane Harvey. There've been a number of flood events throughout the years. So in a way, when we began our work, with the environmental health centers that we've been involved in, it was kind of a trial by water rather than fire, because there was this necessity to respond to community need and to bring to bear what resources we could to help with the response and to help with the recovery. So that's in a way been the our entree into this. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of what we've learned along that way, and hopefully it'll be applicable to some of your own experiences. Please feel free to ask questions, unless Julie would rather that y'all wait till afterward. But so we're going to talk about before the storm, about hurricane preparedness, so risks, and then how do you advise your clients about evacuation, reentry, particularly repairs and rebuilding. What are your potential roles with that? The immediate response to the storm. So sort of in that, that first response when you're getting out there, how do you protect yourself and others by anticipating and identifying those risks? What kind of PPE or personal protective equipment might you need to have beforehand in case it's difficult to get at that time? And then about communication, risk communication, particularly in disaster situations, it should change. And I'm going to provide some information about that and things that you can do to improve communication during those times. And then to talk a little bit about stress management as well. But after the storm, the actual mitigation, what do you need to know to advise your clients? And so, for instance, a lot of people, and not necessarily y'all, but just regular folks, don't understand that the importance of a disaster declaration, that frequently along with a disaster declaration also comes a suspense of requirements to use a certified contractor. And that's in part because there's not enough certified contractors to go around, especially for mold remediation. So it's important that people understand whether someone is certified or not, and if not, to be able to know that they're doing remediation appropriately. We're going to talk about the post-disaster, or really preparing for the next one, which then sort of brings it all full circle. I'm going to talk a little bit about something that we do, and that's a part because we actually work with our public health department, and the importance of the hot wash and how you can learn from and share your own experiences with others. So before the storm, some of the things that you can share with your clients are really kind of myth busting. For those of you who live in flood prone areas, as do I, you know that just because you survived a major storm doesn't mean you're not at risk now. Things change. I'm sure if you've heard from Hal, then you know that we have that the waters are rising. And just because your community hasn't sustained a direct hit doesn't mean it won't now. I think that people on the East Coast, were surprised, certainly when Sandy came through, and some of the impacts that have happened even far inland due to flooding from some of the storms over the last few years, for instance, in North Carolina. And then I hear this all the time, that it's too hard or it's too expensive to strengthen, their house. But there are a lot of things that people can do to prepare their homes: hurricane clips, or adding braces or trusses, replacing windows, that can really mean the difference as to whether or not you have a home to come home to. And then as far as your role, you can apprise clients of any discounts or tax incentives that they might qualify for by making those improvements. So also before the storm, planning for evacuation, reentry, and repairs. These are also things that you can share. What I've highlighted in yellow, or in particular, what that would apply to insurance, of course. So it's important, and that everybody thinks about this. Everybody thinks about gathering emergency supplies well in advance of the storm, and maybe even assembling an evacuation kit. This is where it gets a little fuzzy. A lot of people don't actually have necessarily a clear evacuation plan, in part because we've got to go away from the storm. So depending upon where the storm is coming, then that might need to change. But for people, especially with special needs, or special needs children, it's important to have that evacuation plan. In years past, for instance, the Red Cross shelters would be unable to take you if you had someone with special medical needs unless they had a medical practitioner on site. So it's important to know where you're going to go. As far as the insurance is concerned, I think it's important to identify those potential hazards and weaknesses that might increase a homeowner's risk for damage or flooding, and then to do whatever they can to mitigate those weaknesses, and above all, to make sure that they're covered by insurance. I think during Hurricane Ike here, people became aware for the first time of how important it was to have that flood insurance when really most of them associated their damage that they might undergo with windstorm, and that wasn't necessarily the case. It's also the best time to identify and seek out and do some research on reputable contractors and engineers or architects that you might need, because the time to be looking for a contractor is not after something has happened. So some things that you can do to help your clients be prepared and to hopefully make your lives a little easier in the event of a flood is to just to review their policies, to make sure that they understand what their risks are, and if necessary, to talk about how that risk might change depending upon where they live and what's going on. Sometimes, I think really with Hurricane Harvey, when, with the persistent rain, and, and actually we had, 8 500-year floods, during a relatively short time period, and Houston had 3 in 3 years, so it's kind of like, you think this is not going to happen, but it can happen, and we should be prepared for it, even if it's not particularly likely. And I'm going to share with y'all some the links here that I have. I'll share these links with y'all, as well as some materials, so don't feel like you need to take notes. So that evacuation box, the grab and go box, these are some of the things that people might consider including in that. We all think of a change of clothes, but we never think about, well, what if we end up displaced longer than we think we should be? So might need cash or traveler's checks, a map of the area. Now that we're all so dependent on our phones and on our technology, if technology goes down, then it's good to have backups like plain old paper maps or atlases. Make sure that you have emergency phone numbers and identification documents. Medical, this is really, really critical, particularly when people are displaced for an extensive period of time. Those prescriptions. If you have prescriptions on file with a large national pharmacy, then you can get that filled pretty much anywhere. Here in Galveston, for example, we have a small local pharmacy that delivers, and it's one of the few that did during Hurricane Ike. But then what happened was they were flooded and couldn't reopen, and people were unable to get their prescriptions, particularly when the university was shut down. So it's important to have those things: medical insurance cards and any medical care directives, financial records, keys to your safe deposit boxes, things like that. A list of your usernames and passwords, a flash drive with backups of pictures so you don't have to lug those things around with you. And then, of course, your insurance policies and insurance company telephone numbers. When the internet is down, it's difficult for people to make claims and to look things up. So it's important to have those backups and copies of those important documents. Other things that they might need are portable radio and spare batteries, flashlights, spare batteries, a first aid kit, again, those 2-week supply of medications and the prescriptions themselves, food and necessities, and toiletries, sundries, and pet supplies. So I think it's really important. We've actually started networks here on the island, where from a neighborhood basis, to let people know where you're going and make sure you fill the gas tank of your car and obtain sufficient cash. Again, these in yellow are some things that you might be able to provide advice on, because you're the one who is most familiar with your clients, their needs, and their assets. So what can they do to reduce risk, and encourage them to ask questions about that. So, and these are some things that I included, but you will probably have many more things to add to this list, or they might be different things. But to make sure everything is secured, and that in the event of high winds, for instance, that you're not going to have things flying around. And then just wherever possible to reduce the possibility of water intrusion. And then, if need be, to shut off the electricity and the water to prevent that. I think we all discovered during the winter storm here in Texas that flooding can certainly happen without a storm. We had lots and lots of flooded homes from frozen water pipes. So in this immediate response, or just after the storm, for those of you who are actually taking the field, going out and doing inspections, or going into the area where there's extensive damage, you really need to do everything to protect yourself as if you were one of the first responders, because to an extent you are. So during the recovery from Hurricane Katrina, NIOSH reported that the biggest issue were injuries from cuts and falls and trips. So you need to be very particularly careful walking over and handling any debris that's covered with water. You could slip, you could trip, you could fall. Make sure that you have a current tetanus vaccination. And while probably, while you might think of this as unlikely, it's a good idea if you don't have not had the Hep B vaccine series to get it, because as for instance with Hurricane Ike, and again with Hurricane Harvey, all of the water treatment plants were flooded, and so you actually had sewage in the floodwaters. So, if you can, avoid contact with any stagnant water, and assume that if the water is standing, that it could be potentially hazardous, and act accordingly. Make sure that you have lots of sanitizer with you, and be sure to use it if you're exposed. Wear boots. Consider, steel toe if you can. They're heavy and uncomfortable, but they can certainly protect you. Make sure that you have durable gloves to handle debris. Use hearing protection if you're in noisy environments. Sometimes there's chainsaws going on, or other heavy equipment being used. Make sure that you too have your medicines, your allergies and your blood type in the event that you are injured. And also be aware that floodwaters might have displaced local wildlife. So be vigilant regarding snakes and insects. After Hurricane Ike, we had lots of snakes that came up from the wetlands, and then fire ants, and not so many scorpions here, but certainly fire ants. So just an idea of what you might need. Be sure and have an N95 respirator, or one that provides even more protection. If you're going in, particularly several days after a flood occurred, you're probably already going to experience some mold growth. And be sure and wear protective gloves, goggles or eye protection. You can always wear a face mask. A long sleeve shirt, not the most comfortable when it's hot, but the protection is good. Long pants, and then again, those waterproof boots. So risk communication, I wanted to talk a little bit about this, because I think that a lot of people just don't realize that your risk communication strategies need to change when people are under a lot of stress. And that includes you being under stress, being in the field. And so this is actually based on, on science. This is, based upon studies that have been done about how people communicate during disasters. So the key really is to, and these are all things that, some of you are very experienced in this, so this is probably second nature to you. So knowing, what to anticipate, how to prepare, and then practicing the way that you do things to make sure that you're as prepared as you can get. Now, I've included the names of these theories here. It's not really so important that you know anything about the theories, but that about where they're derived and what they mean for you. So these are some core principles. When people are concerned or stressed or upset, and particularly when they're chronically stressed, when this is, because the aftermath of a flood, is never quick, it's never easy, and this can go on for weeks, months. And so it's important, believe it or not, according to trust determination theory, that they know that you care before they really care what you know. and they may have difficulty hearing you. They may have difficulty understanding what you're saying and remembering, and to be able to remember that. They tend to focus most on what they hear first, and they often focus more on the negative than they do the positive. For some people, that's actually opposite, but you need to be aware of sort of which way they're leaning and make sure that they are more in the factual lane. And that they're, when people are stressed, they often have gaps between their perception of risk and their reality. So these are some tools, there are templates out there. Most important, to be sure that, that you demonstrate compassion, conviction, and optimism for them. They're already sort of in this negative mode and stressed. So you want to be able to model that for them. One way of doing that is with the rule of 3, is to provide your risk communication messaging in sets of 3. That can be in a couple of different ways, and I'll give you some examples. One particular template is that, any key message should be expressed in 27 words or less, preferably if it's verbal, in under 9 seconds, and not more than 3 messages. And that's basically, the keep it simple principle, that you give people too much information and they're already stressed, they just can't absorb it. One of the things that's a little surprising, I think, to people is that when people are under stress, they actually understand, they read, they perceive at about 4 grade levels lower than what they ordinarily do. So again, that's kind of to stress the importance of keeping things simple. And because of that, in general, it's a good idea to follow up, particularly verbal messaging, with written, or maybe if you've had a conversation, to follow up with an email or something, just outlining bullet points, the steps that they need to take, or provide them with a checklist or some other information. Now, to go back to that first one, that, about trust, people in general assess their, how caring they think you are, and, whether or not you're listening to them in as little as 9 seconds. So that first encounter is important. The other things that they tend to be looking for, that they're assessing very quickly, not only is, whether you care about them, and that is important to people, but also your level of competence, your expertise, whether or not they think you come across as honest, and then all other factors. It's only about 15 to 20%. So it's important to remember that, not only are they stressed, but they're often tired. They might be afraid. And you too, after you've done this for a few days out there in the field, are also likely to be stressed and tired. So, so your communication skills, would also benefit from really being able to sort of focus, and especially identify when you are feeling stressed. So if you can anticipate what you might need in the field, so, have your go box, and, that might have all, any handouts that you need, or checklists or forms, to have all that ready to go and well organized beforehand. That does enable you to be in the moment when you're, in that first encounter. And then, remember to be patient and kind with yourself too. So the mental noise thing that we talked about in terms of risk communication, as I said, about everything in 3s, you can give 3 key messages and no more. Or, one thing is to, the triple T model is to repeat the same message, but maybe a little bit differently 3 times. And then people have a tendency to retain the information more. Or you can provide 1 key message that might be supported by 3 supporting messages. It's important to have a risk communication strategy. And, I said now, but that's because these are all things that you can think about now. There's very little related to a flood scenario that we can't think about in advance. So think about, and even brainstorm, with each other about what are the scenarios you're likely to encounter in the field. Who are your stakeholders likely to be? So who do you need to prepare information for? what will be their questions and concerns. You can do frequently asked questions sheets that help, or even a sheet like with all the phone numbers that they might need on it. That will enable you to develop your key messages, to provide supporting information. So one of the things I'm going to provide you with is just a very short booklet on for homeowners about mold remediation. So that might be something that you might have. And then test it out. Even if it's just with your friends or family, test out the materials and see what they think, and then you've got a plan for delivering them. So I have two examples, and one of the things that happens here, we live adjacent to a major petrochemical complex, one of the biggest in the country, and we don't have problems necessarily with radiology, but we do have this issues with people about sheltering in place, and do they even know what that means? So if you had the example where you ask people, well, what is meant by sheltering in place during a radiologic emergency? Your first key message might be sheltering in place is a protective action, which includes going indoors at your current location. Now that seems intuitive, but we've had issues here where people, we said shelter in place and people just stayed where they were. And really that's not sufficient. You need to get inside. So, and then you might provide a second key message that you might be asked to shelter in place rather than to evacuate if there's an exposure. And then staying indoors for just a short time can protect you from exposure to radiation. A different way of doing it might be to provide one key message, but then to provide some supporting facts. So sheltering in place is a protective action, which includes going indoors. Indoor locations might include your home, your office, your school, or a shopping mall. Depending upon the type of building, doing this, sheltering in place can result in a reduction of radiation up to 80%. And people sheltering in place should always stay tuned to a radio or TV for updates related to the exposure. Make sure to close your windows and doors, vents, and heating and air conditioning. So say one fact, but one message supported by three facts. So stress management, I bring this up because this is actually a big deal for our first responders. And again, I think of you all as first responders in many respects. It's expected, stress is expected. It's a disaster. It's a traumatic event. And even if it didn't happen to you, just being exposed to so many people and their experiences in an up close and personal way can be very stressful for you. So I think it's important that anyone involved in response be aware of how to tell when they are stressed, and then what to do about it. So approaches for self-management, again, that self-awareness, being able to manage your workload, building anticipated stress into your schedule so that you have some time to decompress maybe. To try and be aware, of when you are getting stressed and to be able to seek out some balance, learn some stress reduction techniques. That's different for everybody. For some people, it's exercise. Other people, it's meditation. That's going to depend on you. But then also to know who to ask for help and when to ask for help. So this was actually from SAMHSA that is related to first disaster responders, and these are some of the things that are causes of stress. This up close and personal experience. Sometimes if they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, well, seeing it in person sometimes can be devastating. Personally, to be able to see the sheer scope of a disaster or the sorrow and the grief that people are experiencing. And then cumulative stress, from repeatedly being, hearing people's stories, and to an extent, they're all different and they're all the same. And, but it can become overwhelming. And, and then also just the fatigue, and then when you're in a situation, particularly in the early days, where you really are not able to alleviate people's pain, and and so it makes you feel helpless, and and the long hours can be very stressful. So how do you know if you're under stress? People experience physical effects that they don't necessarily associate with stress. So your heart rate, you have palpitations, muscle aches, headaches, tremors. You can have a stomach ache, and just inability to sleep or relax. You can have negative feelings. Find yourself being working on a short fuse, and or anger, frustration, sad, and or having difficulty. If you're having difficulty concentrating or problem solving or doing things that you ordinarily can do without issue, and now it's a problem, then chances are it's stress. And then sometimes people actually engage in more risky behaviors than they would. They because they're stressed, they might increase their use of drugs or alcohol, and they might also experience some social conflicts. So we're going to talk a little bit about cleaning mold. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because all of this information I'm going to make available to you in written format, or the links so that you'll have it. So again, I've got the little asterisk here because under a disaster declaration, states such as Texas frequently eliminate the need to use a contractor who's certified for mold remediation. But these are some sources that people can and should explore to see what are the standards that a certified pro would use. But I think other things that people don't necessarily think about when, with a flood, everybody worries about the mold, and we should, we want to get that muck out done as quickly as possible and get things dried out. But it's really important, particularly, here in Galveston, so many of our homes are historic, so it's really important that people realize that if their homes were built before 78, chances are that there's lead in their paint, that exposure is harmful, of course, and they should should also be familiar with the appropriate means of eradicating it or encapsulating it. So these are some things that that their contractor should do to avoid anything that might create dust. These are ways to do that. To eliminate spreading dust and make sure that its ability to disperse throughout an area is limited. As far as the mold is concerned, it's really it's very similar in that if you're going to be particularly if this has now had a chance to dry out, it can be released into the air. And so it's important to, again, seal off the area from, moldy areas from non-moldy areas where it's going to be removed, turn off the AC so it can't spread throughout the ducts, make sure that, the area is ventilated to the outdoors, and to consider, that whether or not this, if you have any source of wetness, if there's other potential contaminants that are in that. Again, encapsulate, cover with plastic, cut around the covering, and then make sure it's bagged and discarded. Some things, carpet, always make sure that the padding, here in Galveston, it was a big deal. I'm sure Hal could attest that, a lot of our flooring, a lot of people have wood floors, and some of the wood flooring, curly pine, or other forms, there's from species that don't exist anymore. But, and contractors were coming in, tearing things out. The best choice is always to remove and replace, but, if necessary, they should consult a professional about whether something can be preserved, cleaned and preserved. Anything that's porous needs to go. But these are the things that can be cleaned, solid wood, concrete, metal, hard plastics, with non-phosphate cleaners, and clean before sanitizing. And of course, if any sewage was present, and that did happen during Hurricane Ike, all the sediment that we had in our homes had some level of sewage in it. So it was stinky for a reason. Also need to remind people that disinfectants can also be hazardous, and the object is to kill the mold but not cause unnecessary negative health effects. A lot of people assume that if a little bleach is good, a lot of bleach must be great, and that's not necessarily true. You don't need more than a half to 1 cup per gallon of water, and that, you know, using full strength bleach is actually corrosive, and especially, you know, to metals. But there are alternatives that you can use that are not quite as hazardous, but certainly shouldn't be used in mixtures. These are some things that people can also use, this penetrating borate spray. And then, you know, it's always consider, you know, have your client think about, you know, who might be vulnerable in their household. If they have small children, especially small children with hand to mouth behaviors, make sure that they are just, you know, not around until everything is cleaned up. But to be sure and use safer, you know, alternatives. So people with asthma, people with respiratory conditions, they may be as impacted by the cleaning materials as they are the mold. Drying, of course, is critical, and you know, particularly, you know, useful if you have a dehumidifier to help with that, or fans. Again, with AC, you know, dry to the inside, and keep in mind that, you know, that it will be different for people who have AC and who don't. I know our electricity was off for a long time here in Galveston, so we couldn't use fans. So, and then people need to be sure to remain on mold alert after things have been cleaned, because one of the things that we've discovered, and part of our the work that we've done, is that, you know, where mold is improperly eradicated, it can certainly come back, and maybe in places that you can't necessarily see it. So remind people to use their senses. If they can smell it, chances are it's there. I think it's always a good time, especially when you're meeting with people who've had considerable damage, to think about it as a time to remodel, to reduce risk, or to improve health. And that when they, you know, not to choose the least expensive, but maybe, you know, the most beneficial in the long run, you know, to do anything that they can to prevent flood in the future, to improve drainage, or to upgrade their windows, or, you know, or to flash their chimneys, etc. And I'm sure you have many other examples. Other things that they can do. Again, I'm going to go through this quickly because I'm going to provide this for y'all. But there are many other things that people can do to that, in the event that they do experience flooding in the future, that they can minimize the effects. Again, you know, through flooring, wise choices that that are not as expensive or easier to replace or don't need replacing. And then to remember to elevate, you know, things that that could be saved if it had been elevated a little bit, like washer and dryer. To go back with durable and flood-resistant materials. And this is one of the examples I'll provide you with, the Homeowner and Renter's Guide to Mold Cleanup After Disasters. So just to wrap things up, you know, this, what we call a hot wash, is something that we do in the immediate after action, you know, of an event, where we sit down and we just talk about what happened, and we bring different agencies together. It can be a training session, it can be just a discussion to really talk about, you know, what we've experienced, what can we learn from that. There's generally 4 phases. And this is what we want to know. You know, what did you think was going to happen? What actually happened to you? What went well, and why did it go well? And then what can you think of that could be improved, and how? And this is particularly important for, you know, you may have been through many disasters, but one of your colleagues may not have been through any. And so it's important for them to be able to sit in on things like this, to so that they're prepared when they actually take the field. And then, you know, just to be able to identify, you know, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and what are the areas for improvement. And, you know, especially I think about this, and we focus a lot on policy. How can we work together to improve the response next time and improve our preparedness? So that's what I had.
Okay. All right. I have 2 questions that were sent to me by text, and they go together. Can you hear me okay?
Uh-huh.
All right. All right. So first, can floodwater contacting a person's skin make them very sick, or do they typically need an open cut for infection or serious health impacts?
It depends upon what's in the water. So here in Galveston, as in a lot of areas, coastal areas, we have Vibrio vulnificus, and that's present in all the water. I mean, it's here all the time. It's not just something that's associated with floods, but it's in the salt water. If you have a cut, and you are much more susceptible to getting an infection, and you have to be really observant of any cut or scrape or anything to make sure that it's not infected if you've been in flood waters. But there are other things, depending upon what's in the flood water, that may actually be able to permeate your skin. So that's why I said, if you can avoid getting in that water, do so, because there are certain chemicals. And, when we've had, with Harvey, for instance, we had, a lot of the chemical plants were flooded as well. So you may or may not, and it's not just industry. You think about all the things that we have under our sinks right now or in our garages. All of that goes into the water when we flood. So keep in mind, it's not just dirty water. It may be dirty engine oil. It may be household cleaners. It may be fertilizers or pesticides. So all of those things could be in the water.
That's true. So the second part of that question is, if someone gets a puncture wound in flood water, what steps should they take? Can they treat it themselves, or should they go to an ER? Basically, how serious is this?
So I'll give you this from first-hand experience. It was covered with water, and I stepped on a 2x4 with a nail sticking out of it, and it went through my foot. And, my first inclination was what I did was I flushed it with hydrogen peroxide, but then went for emergency evaluation, just because I didn't know what was in the flood water. And it was a deep wound. It went all the way through my foot. So I think to an extent you have to use, your, what's available to you, and then, and to an extent it's common sense, is this something you can manage on your own? If this weren't a flood situation, would I go to the emergency room and, make that decision?
Right. And those are actually good questions, because I have seen pictures of our guys in the field, with waders on, because the water's still there, but things have to get handled. And Wendy has a comment, one of our flood managers.
You gonna ask it?
Is she unmuted?
No, man. Let's find her.
There she is.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute. For some reason, the button wasn't showing. Sorry. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for presenting all of this amazing information. And you've given a great focus to the physical hazards that a lot of our field adjusters have to face. But I think emotional and stress related issues, that is applicable to our inside teams as well, because they talk to stressed policyholders, and it's an anxious situation even inside the building at times. We work a lot of hours, and I like the idea that you suggested about after action review, and I hope we can talk with our teams about doing that, because even though some of us have been doing this a long time, newer people probably haven't been exposed to that kind of stress situation.
Yeah, I think that's really a great point. And because, and I can imagine that to an extent, it's a different kind of stress, but maybe even more intense because you can't get away from it. I would imagine your phone never stops ringing. You know, it's not like you can say, well, you know, I'll have time driving between this house and the next house. You know, that doesn't happen. You know, it's just a constant barrage, and people
Yes.
are angry and they're upset, and you know, it's just the situation is, you know, is just so hard.
It is, and again, I think this is a great topic for us to discuss, and I'm sure we'll be using this information going forward. So thanks for being here.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Wendy, that was a lot was I was going to talk about as well, is because, you know, we don't think about, we're always storm preparing. We're getting ready for the next storm. You know, we're hoping our softwares are calibrated. We're hoping our computers are working as adjusters, but we don't think about our own stress, our own situations, our own physical and mental well-beings before we go out there. Because if we're stress-free and we're physically in a better situation, we can serve the policyholder much better as well. And we can also, like you point out, we can identify these things. You know, if we can identify our stress levels, we're talking to a policyholder, we can identify their stress level and see which direction, which guidance, how do we need to handle that situation differently than from another policyholder in another situation. So all this information that you give us has been great advice. I know, as Wendy pointed out, you know, it's even in our team inside, our desk adjusters inside, and the levels they face. It's not just the field adjusters, it's back and forth. But even with the field, you know, the field handling, we get the physical inspection and the situations that are involved in there and the things that we don't think about because we're focused on getting that policyholder taken care of. We don't focus on the outlining situation around us, the mold, the different types of chemicals and things that you normally don't think about. Like you said, we're first responders. We're out there handling a claim from the beginning. And so now we understand a little bit more how to protect ourselves. Because if we're not protecting ourselves, we're not doing a value to help the policyholder as well. In a situation, we can guide them and direct them and give them advice on how to protect themselves as well.
We have one more question.
I was going to say one
I'm
more.
sorry.
No,
sorry.
But there was one thing that you pointed out that I really loved. It was about cleaning wood, concrete, plastic, and metal. And I have to apply that to claims because, you know, every time you maybe have a wood piece of furniture that gets touched by floodwaters. Well, and this is for the adjusters. We don't have to replace it unless it shows direct physical loss. There's options, like you point out, that can be cleaned. You know, we have to watch out the kind of chemicals and things we use, but yeah, we should be cleaning these things. So I had to plug that in just for the sake of, you know, because we see these estimates come across on contents estimates and we have replace Rubbermaid container, plastic container. And you're like, 1 inch of water. Why are we replacing this? Because it can be cleaned. And these are things that we should be addressing as cleaning. So anyway.
Yeah. No, that's actually a great point. And I think, gosh, maybe that's something we should work on, you know, on some things about, you know, some infographics for people about identify what's in your house and what you can clean, what you can keep and what you're not going to be able to, because then they'll think about replacement. Yes.
But like you point out, I think a lot of this is education. A lot of this is not knowing, okay, I'm in a situation, my mitigation company's telling me it's Cat 3 black water and I need to throw everything out. And that's really not the case. There's things we can do to get it back to its function value, or not value, but what it was intended for in the first place, without any future harms. I mean, as long as there's no direct physical loss that we see that we can report on, it's something that should be looked at as possibly a cleaning item.
I think that's a real positive too, because I mean, there are many things that people have that are sentimental that they don't want to have to get rid of, that they may feel like they have no choice.
Absolutely.
Julie, did you have another question?
Yes, ma'am. I didn't mean to interrupt earlier. Sorry. My computer paused and I thought everybody was through. Okay. So he said, I had a claim with a lot of black mold. Upon entry of the home, it about knocked him out. He said, he has some reaction linger for a couple days. What do you recommend in that situation when you walk into a home and it's just overpowering?
Well, you need some real respiratory protection before going in. If you felt like if difficulty breathing, I mean, black mold, not so much, but there are species of mold that can colonize in your lungs. So you don't want to be breathing that in. And I would suit up. I mean, there's you can even go to Home Depot now and get pretty inexpensive covering, a full cover. And but if it was that heavily infested, I think I would make sure especially to have respiratory protection, and then that needs to be encapsulated before they start removing it. One of the things I caution, I'm sorry, this isn't about that question per se, but I realize now I forgot to say it, is that, I mean, that certainly sounds like a real problem with mold. But, people also have to realize that, when we actually go out and do mold assessment of buildings, and we do indoor air quality studies. But we always do indoor measurements and outdoor measurements because we live on the Gulf Coast and mold is everywhere. So, so it's not like, that if you go into someone's home and mold is found, it doesn't mean they have a problem if mold is just as high or higher outside than it is inside. But when you have something like that, it needs to be taken care of. And I will send you some materials on how to safely do that. We had a school here that it was really sad because the sprinkler system deployed over the summer and no one was aware of it. And because the school had not yet been put into use. And this was years ago. But what happened is when they went back, and now you have the sprinklers have gone off, every periodical once a week, and there was mold everywhere. It was growing behind the wallpaper. And that was a situation that it just needed to be, they needed to seal it off and they needed to get rid of it, all porous materials and clean everything else.
Right. Well, that's all the questions I have.
Dr. Sharon, thank you very much for this great advice. It's, like I said, it's things we just don't think about sometimes. We're focusing on something else, just like the last question that came up, the last statement about what to do in a situation where you see mold everywhere and how to address that. And again, for adjusters, it's being prepared. It's taking the necessary precautions, taking the Tyvek suits, the respirators, whatever with you out there, and keeping yourself safe so that you can continue to provide that service for the policyholder. Because, if you go out and you step on a nail like you did, which is probably very painful, then you're trying to get around and you're trying to deal with other policyholders, and you got to go run off to the doctor and get that taken care of, and just one thing after the other, and then you're behind, and then the whole stress level gets out of whack, and you start getting behind on claims, and then your claims get written improperly because you're so stressed out. You can tell I've been there before.
Yes, it sounds to me like you could be teaching this.
I have been there before, but I never thought about the preparation like you're explaining to us. Some of the things that we failed to think about. So it was I love the topic. I love the information you provided us. I really appreciate you being on. And I just before we leave, there's a couple announcements I want to make, and then we're going to do our giveaways. This is the reason why we did these. To begin with, the Flood News at Noon was to talk about stuff that we don't really engage in on a day-to-day basis as adjusters, as the coverages and claims processes and things like that, but to look at a different perspective from somebody in the industry, a professional that's been dealing with stuff just like on the mold and everything that Dr. Sharon talked about today. We've been doing this for over 2 years now, and we're consistently developing new programs. We're working on stuff. But I will announce right now that we will be back for season 3. Season 3 is in the works. It will start out probably around the first of the year again. We may change the name up a little bit because we're looking at kind of incorporating our flood TPA, our private flood, our property TPA, and our property claims departments and our flood claims departments all together with all their topics and all the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Already have some really interesting topics to present. So I'm really looking forward to season 3. So I hope everybody can join us. And Dr. Sharon, we'd love to have you back on.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd
Sure,
love
there's
to.
something exciting that you can bring to the table again. So I'd love to have everybody back on for that. That's one of the things we're working on. One of the other things we're working on is, we've made these announcements a couple times. It's about our Xactimate. That's one of the programs, getting our adjusters Xactimate level 1 or really level 2 proficiency certified. A lot of our clients are requiring this. We're requiring this. We're becoming more of an Xactimate company. 28 has been sunsetted. They're sunsetting that. So there will be no more support for that. And what we are doing, a lot of the integration we're doing with some of our clients and some of our opportunities that we have coming on board is the Xactimate integration back and forth. And so highly encourage you all as adjusters to make sure, if you haven't taken your classes with us, get your certification from somewhere, wherever it takes. Get your X1 level 2 proficiency certification from somebody, but just make sure we know it's there and we make sure we have your address, because this is something we are doing. We want to make sure everybody's ready. And like we're preparing for getting our gear together now, getting our suits together and getting everything and making sure our health insurance is up to date and making sure all that's done. This is part of that process of being prepared to be able to handle that next flood claim. Because just, as the title said, about it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. We don't know when there's going to be another flood claim. We don't know. It could be now. It could be tomorrow. I mean, I could have just got a notification that one's happening. There could be a tsunami. So we need to make sure we're already prepared with everything that we're supposed to do for our own health, our software, our physical well-being, and our mental well-being. Just be ready for that. So, third thing before we do our giveaway is, I know a lot of y'all know Dr. Howe. He's been on our Flood News at Noon several times. He's presented some great topics in all these presentations, all these episodes that we have gone through. I think this is episode 15. So even including later on this afternoon, episode 15 will be available on our YouTube channel. It's kind of hard to say, actually. It shouldn't be, but it'll be on our YouTube channel. But we're pleased to announce that Dr. Howe has a new program that is coming out, and it's called GeoTrek. And I'm just going to share this with you all real fast before we do our giveaways. And I will let Dr. Howe kind of give you, let me get to the recording, to give you an understanding what GeoTrek is about. So I'm actually very excited. Now, he will be on again. We will definitely have him on here again. But here's a little overview of GeoTrek.
Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Hal Needham. I'm a climate data and natural hazard scientist. Welcome to GeoTrek. GeoTrek's an exciting platform that explores stories related to extreme weather and disaster science that aren't covered by the mainstream media. People that are featured on GeoTrek include engineers, architects, disaster management professionals, historic preservationists, even adventure travelers. We really want to get behind the scenes and cover some of these stories that we don't often hear about. We're developing podcasts, video content, and also written articles that enable you to get really behind these stories of disasters and extreme weather. We really view this as a two-way communication. So we're producing content that relates to disaster-prone communities and helping people get stories behind the scenes. The two-way part, we also want to hear from you. We love to hear from people in disaster-prone communities, what their questions are, or even thoughts or insights that they have. Sometimes people have lived in these communities for decades, and they might have a unique insight that can help all of us help make your communities more resilient.
So anyway, that's Dr. Howe, and one of the programs he is being involved in that we were working with him on. But we will have him back on. He's not going away. We'll definitely have him back on for season 3. It's kind of getting hard, kind of getting used to saying that a little bit. So, but we're definitely excited to see what the GeoTrek is. And if you look at this, if you go to geotrek.com, geotrek-trek.com, there's some great already blogs and articles on things that he's already done. One of them, which I found fascinating, which I never knew, is about regarding the Bellagio fountain and where the water comes from the fountain, which I thought was very interesting, and how they kind of recycle the water. And those are some of the articles and blogs and podcasts and things that we will get from Hal and the GeoTrek team and that program. So, and again, Dr. Sharon, thank you very much for your time. Again, that was a fantastic topic. Gives me some things to think about, and some preparing for storm season. Make sure as adjusters we're ready. We're ready mentally and physically, not just with our equipment, but just overall our own well-being. So, again, great topic. I would greatly thank you for your time. And with that, everybody, have a great year, and we'll talk to you before then, but we'll see you again here on whatever happens to be News at Noon, Flood News at Noon, whatever we turn out to be for season 3 sometime in January. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.